Hermanos, necesito el menor ruido posible acá, porque como el eco es grande, el ruido me interfiere, ¿ok?
All right, Michael, you are good to go.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'm Michael Shifter, President of the Inter-American Dialogue, and I want to thank everyone for joining this special event. We are enormously
Esperen, ya están hablando, hermano, ya están hablando, ya empezó.
This morning con Ivn Duque Mrquez, the President of the Republic of Colombia. We are delighted to welcome President Duque back to the dialogue. President Duque spoke at the dialogue in
No estoy oyendo nada de lo que están diciendo, ya empezó el evento.
2018 before he was elected. And on his first visit to Washington, D.C. as president, the dialogue, together with other think tanks, sponsored a very successful event. President Duque is a lawyer and politician who served for 4 years in the Colombian Senate from the Democratic Center Party before being elected his country's youngest president and taking office in August 2018. He has 2 graduate degrees in law and public policy from American and Georgetown universities, respectively, and worked at the Inter-American Development Bank for 12 years when we first met. President Duque has had to face daunting and multiple challenges over the last 2 years and 3 months, aggravated by COVID-19 that hit all of us earlier this year. He has no illusions about the difficulty of the challenges that await him before he concludes his 4-year term. One of those challenges will be how to deal with the Democratic Biden-Harris-led administration in Washington in just 2 months, when we might see some changes in the bilateral agenda, which has been so fundamental for the longstanding partnership. We're so grateful to President Duque for taking time out of his very busy schedule, especially in light of the enormous devastation Hurricane Iota has caused in Caribbean islands of Providencia and San Andres, as well as other parts of Colombia and, of course, Central America. I know I speak for everyone on this conversation in extending our heartfelt solidarity and support to your government, President Duque, and the Colombian people at this very difficult time. Reconstruction lies ahead. President Duque, who joins us from San Andres, attending the emergency, will offer some brief opening remarks, followed by an exchange, first with me, and then inviting all participants. Participants can submit questions using the Q&A feature in Zoom, on Twitter using our hashtag #DialogoDuque, or by emailing meetings@thedialogue.org. And with that, let me turn it over to President Duque. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. It's a great pleasure for me to join you again at the dialogue. It is a great honor for me to participate in this seminar, where, as you well said, we're here in San Andres Island, and we have seen the devastation caused by Iota hurricane, but we're here attending the emergency. Fortunately, we didn't have major human losses. We had 2 people that were killed by the hurricane. It could have been something of big magnitude, because this is the first time that in Colombian soil we have suffered a hurricane category 5. So I must say that now we're working very closely with the agencies so that we can attend the emergency and put in place a rapid reconstruction plan. So let me thank you again, Michael, for inviting me at the dialogue. And I would try to make some brief remarks saying where we are and where we're heading to regarding Colombia, and also regarding the bilateral relationship with the United States. We have been in office for almost 27 months. And in this 27 months, as we defined 2 years ago when I was participating in an event at the dialogue, our agenda, it's moving forward. We closed 2019 with an economic growth that was above the regional average, the world average, the OECD average. We had the major fiscal deficit reduction in almost 8 years. We had a rise in collections, and we were also putting in place an entrepreneurship agenda that was making Colombia one of the most attractive places for investment in the Americas. And obviously, we have faced in the last 8 months the presence of COVID-19. We had to take rapid, gradual, but fast and draconian measures that allowed us to manage the pandemic. And throughout the last 8 months, we have been able to duplicate our ICU capacity, to improve testing, and to settle the ground to have a gradual and prompt reactivation of the economy, while at the same time protecting lives and also protecting the healthcare system. This has been a year of major challenges as we're facing right now with the natural disasters. But fortunately, we have been able to recover the labor market at a certain pace, and we will hope that by the end of the year, we will set the ground so that in 2021, we will have a growth above 5%, which would be a major recovery for the Colombian economy. And also, that is very important to say, in the last 2 years, we've been able to put in place a security agenda that has allowed us to reach the highest numbers of illegal crops eradication, the larger numbers ever registered in terms of seizures of illegal drugs. And also, we have gotten into a place where we have built the lowest homicides rates in years. And we closed 2019 with the third major reduction in the homicide rate in the last 44 years. If we continue at the pace where we are in 2020, we'll finish the year with the lowest homicide rate since 1976. We have also made important reductions in other crimes, and we have been undertaking a work in the regions that were badly affected by violence and by poverty in the last decades into what we call the regional focused development plans within the strategy that we have called peace with legality. So that's the agenda that it's in place. And in that agenda, we have had a strong support from the United States. And I must say that since the year 2000, the bilateral relationship has been built in two criteria. It has been a bipartisan relationship, and it has been a bicameral relationship in the House and also in the Senate in the United States. We have received a strong support from senators that are Republicans and Democrats, and we have built also with congressmen from different regions of the United States a very close relationship that we value a lot. President Clinton began the Plan Colombia with the Pastrana administration. Then during the Bush administration, we not only continued with Plan Colombia, but we decided to move forward with the free trade agreement. During the Obama administration, many important events took place. And one that I want to highlight was also the support we got from the United States so that Colombia could initiate a process of accession to the OECD. And with the Trump administration, we have received a strong support to access the OECD, but we have also strengthened the relationship in the fight against terrorism and drug smuggling. And at the same time, we have been increasing the trade, the investment, and through DFC, we're now working into a program that we have called Colombia Growth, which is aimed to provide resources for development purposes in regions that were badly affected over the last 3 decades in terms of poverty and crime. We're doing projects that are going to change the surface of those far places in Colombia. We're taking water storage, we're taking contractual agriculture, and we're also putting in place the access to education and healthcare of a higher quality. With that, I could say, Michael, that we have a strong appreciation for the bilateral, for the bicameral, for the bipartisan relationship that we have built with the United States. And as I have said, I have admiration and I have a great respect for the US democracy. And we have been working close with the Trump administration, and we will continue to work closely with the Biden-Harris administration, thinking that our relationship has been based in principles. We want to continue working against narco trafficking, against terrorism, but we also want to increase not only the relationship in terms of trade and investment, but also work along the lines of doing major things in the Americas for energy transition, climate change adaptation, protection of the Amazon. So we are very optimistic, and we are certain that the relationship with the United States will always continue to be strengthened, no matter the political changes in the US democracy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, President Duque. That was excellent. And we'll be picking up on some of those some of those issues, and we're already getting a lot of questions on the issues you just mentioned. But if I could start with just a few questions and to get us going, and then turn it over to the participants. I was at I had the privilege of attending your inauguration in August of 2018. I'll never forget that day because it was quite stormy and very windy, very windy. Everything was blown away, and so it will stick in my mind. But I want to take you back to your speech, your very good inaugural speech, which I really appreciated. And it was a speech that I remember, and I went back and reread it just a couple of days ago. A speech that was very conciliatory, and it called for unity in Colombia and overcoming the sharp divisions in the society that made governing more difficult. And I wonder if you could reflect on that theme and talk about the current moment and how you see those divisions today, how much progress has been made in bringing the country together. Do you see tensions over the next 2 years, or are there compromises in a middle ground that will help avoid confrontational politics?
Well, let me begin by saying that unfortunately, in the times that we live, and it's not only in Colombia, we have seen politics get pretty much polarized all over the world. And maybe it's because the way that the fake news and maybe the way that the sentiments move in the social media exacerbate the one side thinking from both sides, and that makes things more complex. It's not only in the United States, it's happening in Colombia, in Peru, in Italy, in the UK. We're living moments where politics is very much polarized. Nevertheless, and considering what is more important, what I said in that inauguration speech, is that we were going to work very hard to accomplish many important things for Colombia. We said we're gonna get the economy growing and we wanna get the fiscal deficit reduced, and we did it. Obviously, the times of the pandemic have changed many of those things, not only in Colombia, but in the US and all over the world. But we also said that we're going to put in place the peace with legality policy, that we were going to accelerate the implementation of plans in far places of Colombia where those investments were needed for decades. And we're doing that. We also said in that speech that we were going to move legislation in favor of legality so that crimes like narco trafficking and kidnapping will no longer be crimes that could be treated as political crimes and then get no sentence within the judicial system. We also said very clearly that we wanted to increase the protections for the veterans, that we wanted to increase the protections for the poorest of the poor, that we wanted to make the largest investment ever in terms of education and healthcare. All those things, we have been achieving that. And one of the important sentiments that I shared with the Colombian people is that half of the cabinet voted for the yes, half of the cabinet voted for the no when we have the plebiscite. And that means that we respect the way people think about certain issues, but that there are more things that can unite us thinking on a long-term vision that is helpful for the country. And I think we have been working along those lines. And something that is important to say as well, Michael, is that today we're facing maybe the biggest challenge in the world since the Second World War due to a pandemic. But we have been able to lead in the midst of this situation, not only improving the healthcare system, but also accelerating our social agenda. We have built the largest budget ever for education and healthcare, but we have also built the largest budget ever for tertiary roads. We have made the largest jump in energy transition in Colombia. We started with 50 megawatts or less than 50 megawatts of installed capacity, and we have multiplied by 7 the installed capacity, and we will make 10% of our energy matrix by 2022 be all based on non-conventional renewables. And those are issues that are taking place. And we also said at the moment that we wanted to make a technological transformation in Colombia. We're now building the process of training 100,000 programmers. And we have also made the decisions that are accelerating the process so that by 2022, 70% of the Colombian population will have high-speed internet. All those things are happening, and I devote a lot of my time day by day, Michael, so that the things that we said in the inauguration speech, but the things that we said in the government plan are achieved for the sake of all Colombians. So I work and I govern for all Colombians, and we're going to be for the next 22 months not only accelerating the process of achieving those goals, but also being able always to make the big call that we are united in the things that are very important, that we respect, that we have different views on certain topics, but that as a nation, the values, the principles, and the objectives that are necessary for our social transformation are in place.
Thank you, Mr. President. Also in that speech, there's a section of that speech which talks about challenges. And the first challenge that you mentioned in that speech was that 300 social leaders had been killed in the previous 2 years. Yet in the last 2 years, we've had over 500 killed, and experts trying to grapple with this issue have identified a couple of factors. One is the void left by armed groups and the inability of the state to fill the vacuum, the increase in illicit crops, and the lack of a comprehensive rural reform. Could you tell us your plans to address these drivers of violence in a backdrop of a lack of trust between the government and many sectors of civil society?
Well, let me first say that in that speech, when I was taking my oath of office, I said that before I took office, more than 300 social leaders had been killed in Colombia.
Right.
They had been killed by terrorist groups. And most of those terrorist groups are funded with narco trafficking. So I not only denounced that, but in the aftermath and of that process, I also said that we wanted to have a public policy aimed to protect the social leaders. Now, many people ask me, how many social leaders do you have in Colombia? And when we analyze the statistics based on the 22 criteria that has been established by the UN on what can be considered a social leader, who can be considered a social leader, we see that more or less 9 million people in Colombia will fulfill those standards. And just to talk about communitarian leaders, which is one of the 23 categories, we're talking about more than 6 million people that are members of those community councils. So the challenge is big. And obviously, what we have seen is that those crimes have taken place in zones where there are terrorist groups that are linked to narco trafficking. Before I took office, Michael, when we analyzed what happened in Colombia between 2015 and 2018, Colombia passed from less than 60,000 hectares of coca to more than 200,000 hectares of coca by the time I took office. So it was the largest exponential growth ever in terms of legal crops. My first goal was to stop the exponential growth, and we did it. The second goal was to establish a process so that we continuously keep on having a sustainable reduction. And we have also done that. Actually, in 2019, we closed the year with the largest reduction in terms of illegal crops in Colombia in the last 7 years. And that's a demonstration of the commitment we have. And the reason why I linked that with the assassination of social leaders is because if there's more coca, there'll be more violence. So we need to see that strategy, not with a silver bullet, but a combination of instruments. So we have to eradicate, we have to substitute, we need to have alternative development, we need to have precision aerial spray, and we need to consider also specific economic transformation processes in those areas that are connected to contractual agriculture and opportunities for the people that have been pressed to undertake those illegal forms of earning a living. So those challenges are there, and we have seen reduction in the assassination of social leaders. Actually, in 2019, we had a reduction with respect to 2018. And so far in 2020, we have a reduction in comparison with 2019. Am I happy with that? No, because it should be zero. But we have been working with the authorities to have the plans to identify who the assassins are. And with the Attorney General's office, we have been clarifying those crimes we have a 58% clarification on those cases. And what we have found with the Attorney General's office is that more than 70% of all those killings have been produced by Caparros, ELN, Clan del Golfo, all terrorist organizations that are linked with the narco trafficking business. So that's why, in terms of security, we have given that a priority. The most important thing is we have had a reduction in the homicide rate in Colombia. And if we continue in the next 5 weeks, the way we have behaved throughout the year, we'll finish 2020 maybe with the lowest homicide rate in the last 4 decades. For me, that's also a priority.
Great, thank you. President Duque, you have taken a very strong stand on the Maduro dictatorship and have devoted a lot of time to Venezuela policy. Also, Colombia really deserves enormous credit and recognition for generosity in dealing with Venezuelan migrants and refugees who have come to Colombia. I think you've been really just shown great leadership on that issue. My question is, if you, Mr. President, were asked by President-elect Biden, what changes, if any, would you recommend in U.S. policy towards Venezuela in light of the last 2 years of experience that you've had dealing with that very difficult issue? What kind of changes would you suggest, if any?
Well, let me begin by saying, Michael, that I think that's a great question, and it's a great question in the context on the fight. I think the bilateral relationship that the U.S. has built has been based on principles, not on interest, on principles. And I think we have shared the principle of defending democracy. And I really appreciate that all the denouncements and all the actions against the Maduro dictatorship, in the case of the United States, have been bipartisan. And they have also been bicameral, because it is a must for the region to get rid of that dictatorship. It's the most brutal dictatorship we have seen in recent times in Latin America. And I've not been shy when I had to say that Maduro can be compared with Slobodan Milosevic in the case of Latin America. He's the Slobodan Milosevic equivalent in Latin America. And it has been like that because the evidence demonstrates that he has a continuous attitude of violating all forms of human rights. I denounced Maduro before the International Criminal Court when I was a member of the Senate. I denounced Nicolas Maduro before the International Criminal Court when I was elected president, when I was a president with my full capacities and after my oath of office. And I call other heads of state to do the same. We have seen the denouncements that have been made by the OAS. And recently we have been the denouncements that have been made by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in the United Nations. So it is a must that we continue to put all the pressure that is needed for that dictatorship to end. And it's also important to highlight that the humanitarian crisis that we have seen derive from the effects of the dictatorship are brutal. When we tend to think that the most important this year, it will be surpassed by Venezuela. The Syrian crisis was based on the data that we had more than 5 million migrants derived from the crisis. In this case, it will be more than 6 million by the end of this year. And Colombia has absorbed 2 million migrants, almost 2 million migrants in our soil. And we have been putting almost $1 billion per year out of our budget. Even when we compare what has happened in Syria, the proportion of international aid per migrant in the case of Syria has been something close to $2,000. In the case of Venezuela, it has not even gotten to $200. So we have made we have taken a big burden, and we have done it with fraternity, because we know that our Venezuelan brothers and sisters have suffered the effects of that brutal dictatorship. But this is going to be unsustainable day by day, because facing a pandemic and also facing other challenges and having an economic reactivation plan, to deal with the effects of the pandemic, demands a lot of resources. And the crisis of the migration outflow from Venezuela is not going to stop. We have almost 4% of our population in migrants, and the same thing is happening to Ecuador, to Peru, even to Chile. So putting an end to the dictatorship, and by that I mean that four things are accomplished, which is getting rid of the dictatorship, building a national coalition government where the Chavistas and the leaders of the resistance are there, calling for free elections and putting in place a recovery plan. It's the right way to go. It's the only way to go. But we need to consolidate all the efforts. Now, in the last 2 years, we have tried to use all the diplomatic efforts to achieve that. I value that. More than 60 countries around the world have recognized the assembly, have recognized President Guaido. But President Guaido himself alone, he's not going to change the situation. He has been acting with bravery, with determination, but he needs the whole international community support so that the pressure is hard enough so that the dictatorship comes to an end and there's a transitionary government with a broad participation. If you ask me, what would be my recommendation? I'm not in a place to set what recommendation can be done by a U.S. authority. But what I can say is that the bicameral and the bipartisan support is very important, that it remains like that, and that the pressure and the sanctions and the calling for the international community remains strong and gets stronger, so that the pressure leads to Maduro to step out, consolidates a broad coalition of Chavistas and democratic resistance to make the transitionary government, calling for free elections, and also putting in place the economic recovery plan. If those things are not met, it will be business as usual. And then what we'll see is more brutality and more consolidation of the dictatorship. And simply, we cannot afford that for the sake of the regional and hemispheric security.
Great, thank you. One more question, and then I'm going to go to the participants because I'm getting a lot of questions from them. They're very anxious to share their thoughts with you. I remember after the inauguration, your inauguration, 2018, I read in El Tiempo the next day that the Ambassador Nikki Haley, who represented the Trump administration, emphasized three issues in your discussion with you, at least according to the newspaper. One was drugs, one was Venezuela, and the other was China. And China surprised me a little bit because Colombia's relationship was not as deep as other South American countries with China. But of course, there have been increasing ties with China and Colombia under the Trump administration. And the question is, how do you see the role of China in Colombia, in Latin America? And how is Colombia looking to balance its relationship between the two superpowers under what is likely to be a more tense relationship between the US and China globally?
First of all, it's good that you remember Nikki Haley's participation in my oath of office and my inauguration. I have great admiration for her, and we had a great conversation at the time. And I remember that we set an agenda that has been also evolving very positively. We have been working closely in the fight against drugs and drug trafficking. And I should say something that is very important, Michael. Colombia represents almost 50% of all the drug seizures in the Western Hemisphere. That's also the strategic role that Colombia plays in the fight against illegal drugs. The second thing is that strategy is not based just on pure security enforcement. It's based on a holistic approach that deals with security, that deals with the fight against money laundering, that's also based on generating transformation, productive transformation in the areas that have been affected by illegal crops. And I value that agenda has been working positively. And I also value that thinking on a new stage for Plan Colombia, we have built the Colombia Growth Initiative. That I value a lot because DFC, USAID, and other agencies have been working with us for land titling and to putting in place the regional focused development plans that are fundamental for Colombia. Now, on what you ask about China, I think we all have to consider that China has a starting role in the world economy, and it has a starting role in the world geopolitics. And in the case of Latin America, Colombia is the US strongest ally, and it has been like that for decades. And we want that to remain like that for the upcoming decades. We want to keep on strengthening that bilateral relationship. But the United States also has trade relationships with China, has cross investment, and has to deal with a very hard competitions in terms of trade. Every single country in the world is thinking on exporting more to the whole world, and obviously China, because it's maybe one of the largest markets in the world, is a place where everybody wants to export. But everybody also knows that there are a lot of imports coming from China, and that there needs to be strategies to close the deficit. The United States has had that strategy to close the trade deficit with China in the last decade. It started also with the Bush administration, then the Obama administration, and now the Trump administration. And I think that also is going to be a challenge for the Biden administration. Everybody wants to sell more to close the deficit. The same thing happens in Latin America. We are heavily importing from China, but we also want to export more to China. So that is just pure trade relationship. And I think everybody wants to have the right strategy to close the deficit, but also to open opportunities from the export sides that trigger the generation of new employments. We have kept that relationship in a practical way. Colombia has had diplomatic relationships with China for the last 4 decades. I visited China last year. I had a very good. We have also been increasing the trade relationships. But when it comes to the Western Hemisphere, and when it comes to the whole way that we analyze geopolitics based in principles, we have made a clear determination that has been a state policy for the last decades, and is that Colombia is the United States' strongest ally in Latin America. It's based on principles, it's based on trade, it's based on investment, but it's also based on the common values of our democracies and a free economy, and we are strong believers in that. So that for me is important, and I'm pretty much certain that the United States has today on the strategic relationship with Latin America is that the U.S. is aimed to strengthening the relationship with every single country, not only in terms of sharing values, but also on having a permanent trade and investment relationship. And Colombia wants to be always number one in that relationship. And we have also said that now that the U.S. is thinking on nearshoring investments that were in Asia and that has to be close to market, Colombia wants to be the leader of the nearshoring process, so that the relationship with the United States is also strengthening day by day.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. We have a couple of questions just following up on your comments about the importance of having a bipartisan support and collaboration with the United States under the new administration. I have a couple of questions and just want to get your reaction. One is from Sergio Munoz, who, as you know, is from El Tiempo, who says that he had that President-elect Biden had a recent interview in El Tiempo where he claimed that President Trump had politicized relations with Colombia and put in risk the bipartisan support that has always existed with Colombia. Iván Reboledo has said during the recent US elections, members of your party, including former President Uribe, made very overt and public statements supporting the Trump campaign and Republican candidates. The matter became so blatant that US Ambassador to Colombia had to make a public statement on the matter, asking Colombian elected officials not to interfere. Can you comment on that? And a similar way, our friend Sergio Munoz, who is a columnist, as you know, is asking, are you comfortable with former Presidents Uribe and Pastrana campaigning for Trump in US territory?
Well, let me go on the 3 topics. Let me begin by referring to the first question on the Biden as president-elect relationship with Colombia, and also thinking on the future. I can say, Michael, that I have met President-elect Biden. I know him. He has visited Colombia. I have had with him many conversations in the last 3 years. And last time when I made my official visit to the United States, we spoke by the phone. He came to Colombia maybe 2 weeks after I was elected, and we had a great conversation. He has been a great supporter of Colombia, and he was a member of the Senate that was also a promoter of Plan Colombia. And I remember the way that Plan Colombia was crafted at the time. And it was crafted in a bipartisan way. President-elect Biden was there, John McCain was there. Many people that have left a great legacy in US politics were there. So I want to say something very clear. We value the support that President-elect Biden has given to Colombia over the last 2 decades, and we want to keep on strengthening that relationship. And I'm certain that it will be strengthened day by day. Now, in the case of what happens in the midst of a campaign, my predecessor years ago, when there was a campaign in the United States, said publicly that Hillary Clinton was more favorable for Colombia than Donald Trump, and it was in the middle of a campaign. I respect what he said, but I, as president, I would never make such a comment because honestly, I believe that our role as heads of state, when an electoral process is taking place in another country, is to, keep away from the debate. And I have said very clear that I value the relationship that we have made with President Trump. And I value how President Trump has worked with us to face many challenges, not only the fight against drug trafficking, but he has also supported us in the migration crisis that we have felt, and we value the way that the Trump administration has supported Colombia on many issues. But I also value the way that the Obama administration, the Bush administration, and the Clinton administration have done that in the past. So that's why I always said very clear that nobody in my administration was allowed or entitled to make any comment that will be in a specific referral on the political campaign that was taking place in the United States. Now, you mentioned people of my party, and I would say the following. Can a US president tell the people from his party what to say, how to say it? It's complicated because there's a freedom of speech. I would, if they would have asked for my counsel, I would always say, don't do it. But we had a specific case of an elected official from our party who's also an American citizen, and he represents the Colombians in out of the country, the diaspora. He made a referral. I would have not done that, and I considered that should have not been done. Why? Because it could have exacerbated sentiments that were unnecessary in the midst of a campaign. But from the administration, and we have a coalition where we have my party, but also other parties, we make clear that nobody from our administration was allowed or entitled to make any comment that would be in favor of a candidate. And we were very clear on that. And we have been very respectful. And I will always appreciate the support that we have gotten from President Trump. But I also have to express my respect for President-elect Biden and to value the way that he has helped Colombia throughout his career. And that's why I'm certain that with President Biden, the bipartisan and bicameral support for Colombia will continue. And it will continue because it's a success story. The bipartisan way, the bicameral way in which the relationship between Colombia and the United States have been managed is a showcase for other situations that might occur in the Americas and elsewhere. And that demonstrates that when there is a long-term state planning, bipartisan, bicameral support, things can go well. And that's the reason why we will continue to work very closely, thinking that Colombia is the strongest ally of the United States in the Western Hemisphere with the Biden-Harris administration.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. President. We have a question from Steve Donahue from McClarty Associates, and regarding the emergency that you're dealing with now in San Andres and Providencia, which has been hit so hard, and the reconstruction task that lies ahead Steve asks, what can the US government and US companies be doing to help out, and what measures will be incorporated to ensure relief efforts do not put the islanders at further risk?
Well, thank you so much, Michael, and thank you so much for Stephen for asking this question. This is the first time that a hurricane category 5 has hit in Colombian soil. The United States has faced hurricanes of this magnitude, and we will recall the horrible days of Katrina or Hurricane Andrew. This is the first time that we face a situation of this magnitude. I must say that it is a blessing, but also a recognition to the national system of prevention in the case of our islands, and we're very much impacted that unfortunately we didn't have major human losses, considering that this was a major catastrophe. And we have, in the case of Providencia, 98% of all the infrastructure destroyed. Houses are destroyed. In the case of San Andres, we have impacts on houses, but they can be dealt with specific attention on the negative impacts in ceilings and floors and structures. But in the case of Providencia, it was a major destruction. Now, we have called the US to support us with the high capacity planes to mobilize aid. We have been working with Southcom in the last 2 days, and we expect that those aircrafts will support us to transfer aid. And something that is going to be very important for us is also the help on reconstruction. Why? Because I think the US has learned a lot of how to rebuild after strong hurricanes, in terms of what are the right materials, what are the right types of construction, and also how we can accelerate the process of reconstruction, because that's at this moment my major priority. Not only to clean the island and try to reconnect all the services, but also try to have a plan for 100 days, 120 days, where we can have the major recovery. So I will certainly be knocking the doors of USAID. I'll be knocking the doors of FEMA. I'll be knocking the doors of Homeland Security. And I'll be knocking the doors at local governments in the US, specifically the case of Florida, maybe Louisiana, to learn from those experiences and be able to adapt some of those lessons here in Colombia. And obviously, all the technical support from experts that we can get from the US is pretty much valued at this time.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Joel Velasco from United Health Group. We asked President Duque, Colombia's Congress is looking at an important health reform that has the support of your administration. As with any reform, there are positions about potential changes. What are your priorities, the priorities of your administration for reforming specifically the role of the private sector in the Colombian health system?
I would begin by saying that we're in a process where we want to see the healthcare system evolving for the challenges in the near future. First of all, I have to recognize that one of the most important things that has allowed us to face the pandemic is that by the time the pandemic arrived in Colombia in March, Colombia was one of the countries in Latin America with the highest numbers of ICUs per 1 million inhabitants. And we had something close to 11 ICUs per 1 million inhabitants. Today, we have expanded and we have 21. That means we have been able to duplicate the ICU capacity to attend the pandemic. That's very positive. The second thing is we need to improve the way the services provided all over the country, and specifically in places where we haven't had for a long time the right infrastructure. And we have to recognize that we're moving more towards telemedicine, that we want to improve the attention in those areas, that we want to have more professionals, and that the insurance mechanism that we have in Colombia, it's sustainable over time and it guarantees the highest quality. One of the important things that the reforms undertaking in the 90s and the early 2000s had in Colombia is that we got to a coverage that is close to 98%. We have a very high coverage in terms of the healthcare system. But that coverage has to be aligned with quality. And that means the insurance companies and the providers of service have to be of the highest quality. And I think the reform that we're now discussing in Congress and that is going to be enriched by the debates with the participation of members of Congress, but also from interest groups, is going to allow us to leave after the pandemic is over with a stronger healthcare system, larger coverage, better quality, more technology, and certainly, Michael, is going to be based on an approach where public and private operators can have the right coexistence to ensure the best service possible for the Colombian population.
Great, thank you. We have a question, Mr. President, from Jose Miguel Vivanco of Human Rights Watch, who asks, President Duque, you have publicly rejected an initial proposal by members of your own political party and former President Uribe to convene a constitutional assembly to overhaul the judiciary. Instead, you have proposed carrying out some specific legal reforms through Congress. More recently, former President Uribe has presented a proposal to call for a referendum to reform the Constitution, to overhaul the judiciary, and repeal the special jurisdiction for peace. Do you support this new initiative?
I have said over my administration, Michael, that the judicial system in Colombia has to be strengthened for the good of the people. So that's why in the last 27 months, we have presented before Congress many reforms that I think have been very important. I promised when I was a presidential candidate that I will make a constitutional reform so that crimes like narco trafficking and kidnapping will not be granted with amnesty. It has been approved by Congress. We have also said that we wanted to have life sentence for people that have been accused of raping and assassinating children. We have approved that in Congress, and now we're going to have the regulatory bill presented in the next few weeks. We have also said very clear that we have to strengthen the judicial service in the rural areas, and that's why we have presented a reform before Congress so that there is a rural jurisdiction that is strong enough to provide the right service at the right time. But we have also said that alternative conflict resolution mechanisms have to be implemented in Colombia, and we have also presented that reform. And I remember when Dr. Vivanco made comments on the special jurisdiction for peace when there was a discussion about the reforms derived from the plebiscite. And he used to use a phrase, where he said that there could be an impunity piñata. That was the phrase that Jose Miguel used at the time. What we don't want to see is an impunity piñata. And I think all Colombians are claiming that in the transitionary justice, it is ensured that people that have committed crimes against humanity really have an exemplary sentence or an exemplary punishment. The system has been based on the principles of truth, justice, reparation, and non-repetition. And all we're asking is that for the sake of the victims, for not being re-victimized, is that people that have committed crimes against humanity, on the minimum, they cannot keep on being political representatives. Does that need a reform? Some people say yes. Other people say no. Well, the transitionary justice is entitled to do that. Well, those have been my claims, because most of the kingpins and the major responsibles of those crimes have not given all the goods and the resources to repair the victims. And that is a re-victimization. Others have not said the truth, or they adaptate the truth, or they give late truth. All those situations have to be improved for the sake of the victims. Does that need a reform? Some people say yes. Other people say no, because they say that the jurisdiction is entitled to make those decisions within the framework that they operate. All we want in Colombia is that there's no impunity. If we really want to have the victims as the center of a peace building process in Colombia, well, there needs to be an absence of impunity. There has to be truth, there has to be justice, reparation, and non-repetition. And those have been the statements that I have been making in a consistent way since I was a senator, since I was a candidate, and being a president. And I think that's not a matter of left or right. Asking for true justice, and to have exemplary sentences is a must for the present and for the future of Colombia.
Thank you, Mr. President. You've been extraordinarily generous with your time. If you permit me, just one final question. I know you have to get back to your important work in San Andres. The question is, are the peace accords, do you think, likely to remain a source of dispute and contention for the remainder of your term? How could they be managed to avoid inflaming divisions among Colombians? What do you think has worked well and what needs to be done better? And what could the US and an incoming Biden-Harris administration do to be more helpful to you?
Let me begin by saying that when I assumed office 27 months ago, I decided to call the United guarantor and observer, validator of the implementation process, especially considering the most important and fundamental part, to have the people that were in arms to enter into legality. As of today, Michael, 98% of those people are in the healthcare system, and 98% of them are also in the healthcare system. We have introduced and we have expanded exponentially the individual productive projects, the CRUPL or the agremiation productive projects in the regions where they have the transition zones. We are actually making the transition zones become in productive zones of Colombia with the support of the agency. We will be giving housing solutions and at the same time connecting those sustainable projects with a contractual agriculture so that there is a permanent buying of those products. Those things make me very happy, as it makes me very happy to see that the regional focus development plans are starting to mobilize resources, and we'll be inaugurating in the next 2 weeks the project number 900 of those regional focus development plans. We have also been accelerating land titling schemes, and we have also been working in the national multi-purpose cadastre with the support of USAID, among other agencies. Those things are very positive, and I think along those lines we will work. I think the big question mark is we are going to guarantee that there is a trustworthy truth, reparation, non-repetition, and justice for the highest responsible of crimes against humanity. I think that is the great question. Some people might say, well, the special jurisdiction has only been there for barely 2 years, considering that there was a transition process without all the legislation and all the administrative apparatus. But I think that's the biggest challenge that we face. We are going to be in office for 22 months, but the implementation process is going to take maybe 12 more years after I finish my administration. And the special jurisdiction for peace is aimed to last more than a decade. Well, I think the big question mark is whether the jurisdiction is really going to, apply sanctions that are credible for those who have committed the most horrendous crimes in our history and that are the major responsible of those crimes. The second thing that people will be asking today and later is whether those criminals are really giving resources to repair their victims. And the most important thing in connection with the two that I just mentioned is that whether they're going to tell the truth, and it's going to be a truth that is going to come at the right time, and that is not just going to be delayed or managed or maneuvered for their purposes. I think those questions cannot be taken in a defensive way. I think those elements and those claims are valuable enough so that the jurisdiction assumes that truthful reparation, truthful non-repetition, truthful justice. It's essential for building the credibility not only inside Colombia, but also historically, not in a partisan way, in a political way. It's not left, it's not right. It's just the pure common sense of what has to be built so that Colombia ensures that this process is not going to become into what Jose Miguel called in a certain time a impunity piñata.
Great. President Duque, thank you so much for taking time, especially under these difficult circumstances at San Andres. This has been an extraordinarily rich and frank dialogue with you. We really are very, very grateful, and we give our heartfelt solidarity to you and to people of Colombia in dealing with this emergency. When I did go, let me just finish by saying that when I did go back to your inauguration speech, there was one word that you repeated throughout the speech, and that word was resilience, and the resilience of the Colombian people. And I'm sure we'll see it on display again in dealing with the COVID-19 and also with this devastating damage done by the hurricane. So I really, really appreciate it, and I hope that we'll be able to see you soon in person, either here in Washington or back in Colombia. I also want to thank all of our participants who tuned in and submitted questions, great questions. To learn about future dialogue events, visit thedialogue.org/events. There you can also find information about Forward Together, a special event on December 10th, which will assemble former heads of state from across the Americas to engage in a conversation about the future of US-Latin American relations and affirm the importance of increased regional cooperation. And finally, my thanks to the cooperation of the Colombian Embassy here in Washington and President Duque's excellent staff, and also the hard work of our dialogue team, Denise Yanovich, Irene Stefania, and Kate Blancet. Thank you all very, very much for making this a successful event.
Thank you so much, Michael. It has been a great pleasure.
Please stay healthy and stay well.
Thank you
Take
so
very
much.
good care. Best to your family.